Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India News Hour, India's voice to the world. With me, Deepika, coming up in the next 1 hour. US President Donald Trump threatens Iran with death, fire and fury if it disrupts shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran guards say they will determine the end on the 11th day of the conflict. Iran's foreign minister says negotiations with US no longer on the agenda. Arakchi adds it will continue with missile attacks for as long as necessary. Government of India issues Natural Gas Supply Regulation Order 2026 to regulate production, supply and distribution of natural gas in the country following disruptions in global supply. Oil prices continue to swing wildly. Trump weighs steps to ease oil prices, including Russia sanctions relief. G7 decides on necessary measures at emergency meeting. Good afternoon to all the viewers joining us at this afternoon broadcast. To begin with the big news coming in from West Asia. Well, the conflict involving Iran, Israel and the US is spreading across the Gulf region as Iranian drones and missiles target multiple countries. Iran's Revolutionary Guard said they targeted a US base in Iraq's Kurdistan region as the war with the United States and Israel continues. Saudi Arabia's Defense Ministry spokesperson says the country's military has intercepted and destroyed a drone east of Al-Kharj Governorate. The United Arab Emirates also said it was intercepting a drone and missile attack from Iran. Sirens sound in Jerusalem after Israel and military warns of missiles from Iran. The warning came as the US-Israeli war against Iran entered its 11th day, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying Israel was not done yet with its military campaign. Now, US President Donald Trump stated on Monday that the US will intensify actions against Iran and would go further and further while assuring that military operations would end very soon, helping stabilize turbulent markets amid the escalating West Asia conflict.
We could call it a tremendous success right now as we leave here. I could call it, or we could go further, and we're going to go further. But the big risk on that war has been over for 3 days. We wiped them out in the first 2 days.
Now, following the appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei, son of the assassinated Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as Iran's new supreme leader, Tehran unleashed missile and drone barrages on Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Israel and even Turkey, intercepted by NATO defenses. Iran maintains the Strait of Hormuz blockade, halting most tanker traffic and driving benchmark crude to highs before a partial retreat. Wall Street turned positive on Trump's short-term excursion remarks after over 5,000 targets were struck. France is leading defensive efforts to reopen the vital choke point post-conflict peak, while Russia has vowed unwavering support to Iran amid regional rallies and intensifying Hezbollah clashes in Lebanon. Meanwhile, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, has declared that Iran alone will determine the end of the ongoing war, rejecting US President Donald Trump's claims of imminent victory and demands for unconditional surrender. Brigadier General, Deputy Commander of Khatam al-Anbiya of Central Headquarters, warned that if US and Israel attacks persist, Tehran will block even 1 liter of oil from leaving the region. He further vowed unrelenting retaliatory strikes and designated all American military bases across the West Asia as legitimate targets, signaling Tehran resolve to impose its will despite heavy losses and the prolonged regional crisis. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated on Tuesday that his country would keep fighting as long as necessary. In an interview with an American broadcaster, Araghchi effectively ruled out negotiations with Washington, saying Tehran had a very bitter experience of talking with the Americans. Recalling previous US attacks during earlier negotiations, Araghchi said he did not believe negotiations with the Americans would be on the agenda anymore. Speaking of the strategic Strait of Hormuz, Araghchi said that Iran has no intention to close it right now, but as the war continues, they will consider every scenario. Now, earlier, US President Donald Trump issued a forceful warning on Truth Social, threatening that any Iranian action to halt the oil flow through the Strait of Hormuz would trigger an overwhelming American response. He stated Iran would be struck 20 times harder than previous attacks and that United States would destroy easily destroyable targets to render Iran's rebuilding virtually impossible as a nation. Now, Trump also described the potential devastation as death, fire and fury while expressing hope it would not occur. He framed the US military capability as a gift to China and other major oil importers reliant on the strait, urging appreciation for America's protective role amid the escalating West Asia conflict. Donald Trump on Monday said that he had a very good call with the Russian president about Ukraine and the conflict in the West Asia.
I had a very good call with President Putin. We had a lot of people on the line from our side, from his side. We were talking about Ukraine, which is just a never-ending fight. And look, there's tremendous hatred between President Putin and President Zelensky. They can't seem to get it together. But I think it was a positive call on that subject. And we obviously talked then about the Middle East. And he wants to be helpful.
Now, as per the Kremlin foreign policy aide Yuri Ushakov, the two leaders spoke for about an hour after Trump initiated the call. He said Putin shared proposals aimed at reaching a quick settlement to the conflict involving Iran during the conversation.
A phone conversation took place this evening between the presidents of Russia and the United States. Donald Trump called Vladimir Putin to discuss a number of extremely important issues related to the current international situation. The focus naturally was on Iran conflict and on the US participated trilateral talks on the Ukrainian settlement. I should say straight away that the conversation was substantive, frank and constructive, as is usually the case in the dialogue between the Russian and US leaders.
Further, he also mentioned that Trump shared his view of the situation, particularly regarding the ongoing US-Israel military operation.
The Russian president set out a number of considerations aimed at the swift political and diplomatic settlement of the Iran conflict, taking into account the contacts held with leaders of the Persian Gulf states, with Iran's president Pezeshkian, and with the heads of several other countries. In turn, the US president gave his assessment of developments in context of the ongoing US-Israel operation.
Meanwhile, Australia said it will deploy a long-range military reconnaissance plane to the Gulf to protect the civilians. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese told the media on Tuesday that an E-7A Wedgetail aircraft and supporting Defence Force personnel will be sent for an initial period of 4 weeks to help protect and secure the airspace above the Gulf. Albanese said he decided to send the advanced radar surveillance plane to the Gulf following a discussion with UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. In some other related news, Australia has granted humanitarian visas to 5 members of Iranian women's soccer team on Monday. The women had been due to fly home, but supporters had raised fears for their safety after the team declined to sing the national anthem ahead of their match against South Korea last week in the Asia Cup. This prompted criticism in Iran, with one conservative commentator accusing the team of being wartime traitors and pushing for harsh punishment. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said the country is willing to provide assistance to other women in the team if they want in this very delicate situation.
We issued 5 humanitarian visas to members of the Iranian women's soccer team. We've been preparing for this for some time. Australians have been moved by the plight of these brave women. They're safe here and they should feel at home here. And once it was made clear that these women wanted assistance, the Australian Federal Police moved them to a safe location where they remain. We're willing to provide assistance to other women in the team, noting that this is a very delicate situation and it is up to them. But we say to them, if you want our help, help is here.
Australia's humanitarian visa program grants permanent protection to refugees and people in humanitarian need. Visa holders can live, work and study in the country. Meanwhile, in Iran, investigative group Bellingcat released analysis on Sunday showing a 3-second video clip geolocated to the site of a bombed school in Minab, southern Iran, that killed over 165 people, mostly children, on the 28th of February. Researcher Trevor Ball identified the falling munition as a US-exclusive Tomahawk cruise missile, contradicting President Donald Trump's claim that Iran caused the explosion. Satellite imagery and expert reviews indicate the school was hit during rapid US strikes on an adjacent Revolutionary Guard base. The Pentagon has launched a civilian harm assessment, while Israel denies involvement in the incident. Time for a short break, but still to come on the other side. Up next, we'll get you a detailed report on how the world is planning to overcome the oil and energy crisis. And voicing concern on safeguarding economic rights of landlocked Afghanistan, India comes down heavily on trade and transit terrorism in a veiled reference to Pakistan at the UNSC.
Geopolitics and trade deals. Economic challenges amid development. Hard work and the path to prosperity. It's the economy, always. Between walkers, money is what money does and says. Supply creates its own demand. Between the bulls pulls and bears tears. When supply chains globalization and India rises to the podium. We'll get you centered with the Economic Brief at 8 p.m. every Thursday on DD India. Welcome to DD India, where a billion voices unite, connecting viewers to the stories that matter. India is not just another news channel. It's the international channel that puts the spotlight on the global south, bringing you stories from the heart of emerging economies, dynamic cultures and transformative voices. As the international news channel of India's public broadcaster Prasar Bharati, DD India delivers high-quality content from every corner of the globe, focusing on the stories that shape our future. We don't just report news. We connect you to India's voice in the global narrative, from current affairs to culture, from economic growth to sustainable development and the ever-evolving world order. DD India gives you a comprehensive view of the world around us. Stay connected, stay informed, and embrace the stories that shape our lives. DD India. India's voice to the world.
Welcome back after that short break. You're watching DD India News Hour. Well, oil prices fell on Tuesday after hitting their highest level in more than 3 years in prior session, as US President Donald Trump predicted the war in the Middle East could end soon, easing concerns about prolonged disruptions to global oil supplies. Oil prices surged past $100 a barrel on Monday, hitting session highs of $119.5 for Brent and $119.48 for WTI, which is their highest since mid-2022, as supply cuts by Saudi Arabia and other producers during the expanding US-Israeli war with Iran stoked fears of major disruptions to global supplies. Prices later retreated after Russian President Vladimir Putin held a phone call with Trump and shared proposals aimed at a quick settlement to the Iran war, according to Kremlin aide, easing concerns about a prolonged supply disruption. Gulf oil producers have begun cutting output as the US-Israel war on Iran disrupted shipping in the region. Now, over the weekend, Iraq slashed production at its main southern oil fields by 70% to 1.3 million barrels per day, while Kuwait Petroleum Corporation also began reducing the output and declared force majeure. Adding to the cuts, Saudi Arabia has now begun trimming production, sources said on Monday. On the other hand, European gas prices tumbled around 15% on Tuesday after US President signaled that the US-Israel war on Iran could end sooner than expected. The Dutch TTF natural gas contract, considered the European benchmark, fell to around €48 after rising sharply the day before. European finance ministers were closely monitoring oil prices on Monday and were actively considering measures to mitigate any impacts on their economies. Speaking after the Eurogroup meeting of finance ministers in Brussels, European Economic Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis said that G7 energy ministers stand ready to release strategic oil reserves, while President of the Eurogroup, Kyriakos, said that they are closely monitoring market reactions to the developments in the Middle East.
We're closely monitoring market reactions to the developments in the Middle East. This is what dominates international headlines. The European economy has the capacity and the resilience to absorb temporary shocks, but at the same time, we must be prepared for a more prolonged period of instability with potential disruptions in shipping, increases in energy prices, and implications for inflation.
After the meeting of Eurozone finance ministers, Dombrovskis said that G7, the United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, Italy, Germany and France that make the G7, were in agreement to coordinate their actions on oil. European Economic Commissioner warned against easing sanctions on Russia.
It's important that we do not now ease the pressure on Russia and do not help Russia to fill its war chest using this situation of elevated oil and gas prices right now. So that's why it's important that we stay the course with our sanctions, implementing the G7 price cap, moving towards maritime services ban. And we had a discussion indeed on US positioning on this, and also US is broadly aligned with this approach, and they were emphasizing so what they were discussing in the case of India being, so to say, very much contained both in terms of time and scope of the measure, so they do not expect substantial impact of this on Russian oil revenues.
Now, G7 meeting of finance ministers held a meeting to discuss the possibility of a joint release of emergency oil reserves. Following the meeting, France's Finance Minister Roland Lescure said that G7 is ready to take all necessary measures to stabilize the energy market. He said that for the moment, there were no problems with oil or gas supply, whether in Europe or in the United States.
I want to be very clear today. The oil market and the gas market as well is being affected by disruption, mainly linked to the fact that oil and gas exports leaving the Middle East are headed to Asia, a region therefore directly impacted by market upheavals. Today, there is no problem with oil and gas supply, whether in Europe or in the United States. Nevertheless, we will look closely at how we can stabilize all flows, the entire market, and I repeat, by examining all measures, including, if necessary, the release of strategic reserves.
Now, the head of the International Energy Agency, Fateh Birol, also took part in the meeting of G7 finance ministers on the global economic situation and the West Asia conflict. Providing an update on IEA's view of conditions in global oil markets, the head of IEA said that global oil markets have deteriorated in recent days. He also added that in addition to the challenges of transit through the Strait of Hormuz, a substantial amount of oil production has been curtailed. Now, this is creating significant and growing risk for the market. And at the meeting, they also discussed all available options, including making IEA emergency oil stocks available to the market. The head of IEA also said that IEA member countries currently hold over 1.2 billion barrels of public emergency oil stocks, with a further 600 million barrels of industry stocks held under government obligation. Now, the central government of India has assessed that the ongoing conflict in the West Asia has disrupted liquefied natural gas shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, and suppliers have invoked force majeure, necessitating the diversion of gas to priority sectors. Now, the central government has issued directions to gas producers, marketers and pipeline operators that include all the entities involved in production, import, marketing, transportation or supply of natural gas. Now, this is the Natural Gas Supply Regulation Order 2026. If you talk about the impact of the order, well, 100% supply of domestic PNG and CNG for transport and 80% supply to tea, manufacturing and other industrial consumers via the national gas grid. It also includes 80% supply to industrial and commercial CGD consumers and 70% supply to fertilizer plants. Now, with 30% of India's natural gas coming through the Strait of Hormuz, the order also establishes priority allocations, ensuring that these sectors receive preferential supplies. India is also sourcing gas via alternative routes to offset potential shortages. Retail fuel prices in Sri Lanka have increased after a revision by the state-owned Ceylon Petroleum Corporation that came into effect from Tuesday. The new pricing structure has raised fuel costs by around 7 to 8%, with an increase of at least 24 rupees per litre across the island. The revision comes amid volatility in global oil markets due to tensions in the Middle East that have pushed crude oil and crude prices above $100 per barrel. The move is part of ongoing efforts by Sri Lanka to stabilize its finances following the severe economic crisis in 2022. On the other hand, Bangladesh has introduced fuel rationing as the West Asia conflict worsens the energy crunch in the import-dependent nation. The Bangladesh Petroleum Corporation has limited fuel sales for most vehicles after attacks on Iran by the US and Israel and Tehran's retaliatory strikes across the Gulf that raised fears of supply disruptions. Bangladesh imports nearly 95% of its oil and gas needs. Authorities have also capped fuel purchases for several vehicles after panic buying and hoarding that led to long queues at fuel stations across the country. Now, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said schools would close for 2 weeks and announced sweeping cuts to government fuel use and spending on Monday. He said the measures are aimed at controlling the situation arising out of surging oil prices triggered by the conflict with Iran, which are threatening to destabilize the economy. Under the new measures, all schools will close for 2 weeks from next week onwards, while the universities will shift to online classes mode immediately to reduce commuting. The government departments will also face a 50% cut in fuel allowances for 2 months and 60% of official vehicles, excluding buses and ambulances, which will be taken off the route. And Egypt increased domestic fuel prices by up to 30% on Tuesday, citing exceptional global energy pressures caused by the West Asia war, which has disrupted oil supplies and shipping routes. Now, the increases announced by the Petroleum Ministry apply to gasoline, diesel and natural gas used in vehicles due to supply chain disruptions, higher risk and rising shipping and insurance costs. Oil prices briefly surged above $119 a barrel on Monday before plunging to around $84 after US President Donald Trump said the US-Israel war with Iran would end soon. Diesel, one of Egypt's most widely used fuels, rose by 3 Egyptian pounds, or about 17.1%, to 20.5 pounds per litre, up from 17.5 pounds. Natural gas used for vehicles saw the largest hike, jumping 30% to 13 pounds per cubic meter. Moving on. US has censured Afghanistan over its detention of American citizens, a move that could lead to a ban on US passport holders traveling to the country. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a statement that he was designating Afghanistan's Taliban government as a state sponsor of wrongful detention, demanding that Kabul release all US citizens detained in the country, including Mahmoud Habibi and Dennis Kool. He added that Taliban continues to use terrorist tactics, kidnapping individuals for ransom or to seek policy concessions. Now, these despicable tactics need to end. The Secretary of State also said that he had concluded it was not safe for Americans to travel to the country because of the risk of being unjustly detained. Meanwhile, UN Security Council meeting on Afghanistan was held on Monday, where US Ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, said that the international assistance to the country should be evaluated given Taliban intransigence and its exclusion of the female population from basic rights. He noted that the budget for the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, the mandate of which is up for renewal next week, is the largest of any special UN mission across the world.
In light of the Taliban's intransigence, we must carefully evaluate the utility of international assistance and engagement in Afghanistan. UNAMA's budget is the largest of any special political mission in the world, even after a reduction in its 2026 budget by 15%. This council must consider carefully the funds we collectively provide for this mission's budget when the mission's female national staff are not even able to go into the office to work.
India's ambassador to the United Nations, P. Harish, also spoke at the UNSC meeting on Afghanistan. And he strongly criticized what he termed as trade and transit terrorism in a veiled reference to Pakistan, as he urged the international community to safeguard the economic rights of landlocked Afghanistan. The envoy stressed that unhindered trade and transit are essential for Afghanistan's economic recovery, warning that obstructing these channels amounts to economic coercion against a vulnerable landlocked developing country.
The Secretary General's report also expresses deep concern at civilian casualties caused by cross-border armed violence. We reiterate and support the Secretary General's call urging compliance with obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, and ensuring protection of civilians. India strongly condemns the airstrikes on Afghan territory, which are flagrant violations of international law and the UN Charter and the principle of state sovereignty. It's hypocritical to espouse high principles of international law and Islamic solidarity on the one hand, while mercilessly carrying out airstrikes during the holy month of Ramadan that have killed 185 innocent civilians as of 6th March, around 55% of whom are women and children, and displaced over 100,000 according to the UNAMA on the other. We also reiterate a grave concern on the practice of trade and transit terrorism by denial of passage for trade and the cynical closure of access for a landlocked country. UN declarations on LLDCs sound hollow in the face of such actions. The trade and transit vulnerabilities of LLDCs should not be weaponized.
Time to take a We'll get to a detailed discussion on India's measure to tackle the energy crisis. A notice to move a resolution seeking removal of Om Birla as Speaker admitted in lower house of the Indian Parliament.
launch a bombing campaign against Iran. The Philippines vessel suffered structural damage. The saga of child sexual abuse is the United States China's debt trap strategy. Truth is stranger than fiction. But sometimes hard to uncover. Trust us to tell the truth, unadulterated and pure, of every story that matters to you. You read between the lines, cut the clutter, and connect the dots to get you the full picture. Watch Connecting the Dots at these times with me, only on DD India.
Welcome back after that short break. Let's quickly recap top headlines of the hour. US President Donald Trump threatens Iran with death, fire and fury if it disrupts shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran guards say they will determine the end on 11th day of the conflict. Iran's foreign minister says negotiations with US no longer on the agenda. Arakchi adds it will continue with missile attacks for as long as necessary. Government of India issues Natural Gas Supply Regulation Order 2026 to regulate production, supply and distribution of natural gas in the country following disruptions in global supplies. Oil prices continue to swing wildly. Trump faced steps to ease oil prices, including Russia sanctions relief. G7 decides on necessary measures at emergency meeting. And now, first, let's understand what is going on in the West Asia and its repercussion on the energy crisis. And to get you more on this, I'm joined by DD India correspondent Amritpal Singh. Good afternoon, Amrit. Well, Trump has issued fresh warnings to Iran, but on the other hand, Iran's FM also said that now negotiation is not on the agenda. Do we see a prolonged conflict here, Amrit?
It looks like it's going to be a prolonged conflict because if you look at the strategies of both sides, one, there is bellicose rhetoric flowing out from both sides. Trump saying fire and fury if they close the Strait of Hormuz. Earlier he said we'll escort ships through. They said, come, we're waiting for you. Clearly, it's just a 33-mile wide strait, and Iran controls the waters there. There is no military parity between the United States and Israeli duo combined and Iran. But Iran knows that once it attacks American ships, America attacks them back. The risk appetite of the world is at its lowest. So insurers will pull out. Ships wouldn't want to pass through. These are huge cargo tankers. So if any drone or missile attacks them, the kind of loss that the company bears, the whole shipping line can go down. So who will you escort when ships are not willing to pass through that? They've told, they've made unreasonable proposals like tell the Europeans to shut down the US and Israeli embassies in their capitals and we'll let their cargo pass through. Very well knowing that the Europeans wouldn't do that. They are allies of the West. So clearly, there is shadow boxing going on from both sides. There are maximalist positions being taken from both sides. Trump is threatening the Iranians, saying that we'll hit you 20 times harder than we've already hit you. The Iranians say we're not ready to talk to you because they know the more they belong, the economic pinch will affect the world and the pressure will come from the world quarters, including Europe, on the Americans, on them and the Americans and the Gulf states because of their water security, food security, disruption of air traffic in that area, sea traffic in that area. So clearly, the world could build up pressure on the United States and Israel to stop it as soon as possible. But Iran wants to do it on their own terms. Therefore, you hear Arakchi saying that no talks with the Americans.
Right. And now, considering the worldwide energy crisis, India has today come up with a very important order for its regulation. Tell us its importance and highlights in view of the prevailing worldwide energy crisis, Amrit.
Clearly, India, which imports about 60 to 70% of its LNG needs and mainly through the Gulf countries, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, 40%, Qatar accounting for the largest 40% of the trade, and Qatar shutting down its Qatar Energy, shutting down its facilities after attacks on its energy facilities. India is, seeing an imminent shortage. So the government doesn't want it to go out of hand. So they've invoked the Essential Commodity Act, regulating the supply, also telling the refineries to step up the LPG production, and also regulating it that the domestic market is not hit. The uninterrupted supplies go to the domestic market, though putting in measures like the interbooking period increased from 21 days to 25 days. Prioritizing the imports of the LPG to essential industries like hospitals and educational institutions, and also forming a committee of the EDs of the 3 OMCs, or the oil marketing companies, to review the representations to other sectors like hotels, restaurants, etc., which require LPG to run, but trying to avoid a panic, seeing that there is the West Asia crisis has sort of had its impact on especially the gas reserves and the gas imports, and and also trying to regulate the supplies of it. Deepika?
All right. Thank you so much, Amrit, for joining us and getting us the latest on this developing situation. And now let's also have an expert analysis on this. And for this, I'm joined by Professor Gulshan Sachdeva from the School of International Studies, JNU. Good afternoon, sir. Now, keeping in view the sensitivities of energy supply, the centre took swift action and came up with the order agreeing to the fact that the conflict has affected liquefied natural gas shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. While the supply will now be ensured based on priority sectors, tell us how will it benefit the common people and which sectors will have to wait further?
Well, thank you. This is a very precautionary kind of measure which government has taken before there is any kind of crisis or problem in the country. Now, at the moment, as you know, situation is pretty serious in a sense that already now there's 11th day of war. And yesterday we also saw the kind of volatility which can happen in the energy market. The oil prices yesterday were, more than 115 barrels. And today it has come back after certain developments to close to 90. But you never know, depending on how things move from day to day onwards. But one thing is quite certain, that in the next, at least foreseeable future, in the next few weeks, there is going to be volatility. And even if they stabilize, they'll stabilize at a relatively higher rate. Yesterday maybe the things were going up to 120, 115, but today, when the certain measures have been taken internationally, all the G7 countries have met. The President Trump has issued certain warnings to Iran about the closing of Strait of Hormuz, and International Energy Agency has also advised all its members to supply or open all their strategic reserves. So there is a bit of a change since yesterday's position, but as we know that the war is still pretty going on. I mean, it may take longer, and many of the production centers within the Gulf region, they have been targeted and production has been stopped. The transportation is problematic. So obviously any government which is responsible government has to look into all these conditions. And they're trying in various ways. I mean, this one order is just for the domestic, managing supply, control and production of gas in India. But, there are many other things. I mean, the diversification of imports. Now, perhaps we had stopped buying, because of the way I think India-US deal and other things were happening. So imports from the Russian crude for the last 1 or 2 months was somewhere around 1 million barrels a day. It may go up now. Similarly, India is also trying to find new other sources from Latin America and also from Africa. So, and then of course we do have pretty, significant strategic reserves of about 250 million barrels which are, to my understanding, about 80% are already filled. So this can easily, even if there is a serious crisis in crude oil, at least about 50-60 days, India can live with all strategic reserves. And there was advice from, as I said, from the International Energy Agency to others, to members, basically to release their strategic reserves. Since India is not a member, full-time member of the IEA, so we haven't really agreed to release, basically keeping in mind any kind of eventuality, so we have at least sufficient reserves already in place. So and of course the RBI is also I think looking at the situation very carefully, because once the prices of oil goes up and other energy sources, that there is also a pressure on Indian currency or many other currencies as well. So they are also making their own interventions. Already we have seen there is some pressure already on rupee, and because once you have oil prices have gone up, and if there is a pressure on rupee, then there is a tendency towards inflationary pressures in other areas as well. So large number of areas in which I think the government has to really work. And as in fact we have seen with the statement, Sumoto statement which was given by External Affairs Minister in the Parliament, basically India is looking, as he very clearly outlined, three major things. One is that India is urging all parties basically, to come to negotiated table and de-escalate the situation. And second, because India is dependent on very significant energy from the Gulf region. India is very looking at the energy security situation very carefully, that Indian consumer is not really affected. And of course, we also have about 10 million people living in this region. So their well-being is also, is very main priority for India. At the same time, we have also seen really serious disruption in the aviation sector, because this region is also a very important hub for India's
Right.
for India's kind of air transport to Europe, US, and also to this region as well. So there are in fact various fronts,
Right.
where India of course is trying to work politically, and also trying to talk to them. The Prime Minister, as you mentioned, he already talked about 8 or 9 leaders in the region.
Right.
External Affairs Minister has also talked to them. So we are working as we can, but of course situation is very complicated and we can only influence to an extent. Only thing what we can do is that, since this really affect your energy and also many industries and also economy, so how do we really have to day to day keep watching and then working accordingly? This is what I think the government is doing.
Professor Sachdeva, this also brings us to another important question, is that for how long will this plan work, and what happens if the conflict really continues for a longer duration?
Well, we don't know. The situation is very complicated at the moment. When you start any particular kind of conflict, it looks, that as if it's, this is what perhaps, when President Trump announced, he thought maybe it's going to be a shorter operation, as they did in Venezuela. But we have also seen what has happened in Ukraine. The President Putin also thought that, he'll wind up everything in a couple of days. And now we are in the 5th year of that conflict continuing. So here it may not really take that long, but definitely, already we have seen this 11th day today. Although there is a very significant, very serious damage to Iran, to the infrastructure, to their air power, to their navy, but still they are continuing to fight. They are continuing, and they one Ayatollah Khomeini has gone, and the new Ayatollah Khomeini is back. So the leadership is still intact, and they have also said that we are willing to fight for our own sovereignty, for our independence. So and as situation deteriorate, or in fact the situation become different, then even the international geopolitical situation also changes. There are reports, and even the President Putin himself has mentioned that Iran is our partner, so they may be supplying certain kind of assistance to them. The same is also true with some other countries like China. So, once things start going in different direction, then you never know where it goes. But the trouble is, for a country like India and for many others, this is not just only about geopolitical and issues about international law, etc., which of course are very important questions. But at the same time, this really immediately have impact on your energy security, and this region is also a very important part, our trading partner. About 250 billion US trade takes place in this region, and we also have a lot of other plans as well. I mean, with Iran, we used to have with Russia, all these international north-south trade corridor. With other partners in the Gulf, we also have plans for India, Middle East, Europe economic corridors, and many other those kind of issues. All of those major plans obviously also goes to the background when the war is going on in this region. So these are serious difficulties. Some are things which are long term, some are long term economic implications, some are strategic and political implications, but you also have immediate implications which are basically policymakers have to really deal on day-to-day basis.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Professor Sachdeva, for joining us and getting us a rounded perspective with that analysis on the developing situation. Moving on, updates on the budget session of the Indian Parliament now. The lower house has taken up discussion on the resolution seeking removal of the Speaker, Om Birla, on Tuesday. Congress MP Dr. Mohammad Javed moved the resolution when the House met after the first adjournment at 12 noon, according to Indian Standard Time.
व्यवस्था जो बनाए रखा है, हमारा सदस्य ऋषिकांत दुबे जी ने जो बताया उसका तो रूलिंग आपने दे चुके हैं। अब ये रूलिंग देने के बाद, इस रूलिंग देने के बाद जो डिप्टी स्पीकर हो या मेंबर ऑफ जो पैनल ऑफ चेयरमैन का अथॉरिटी ऑलरेडी वेल डिस्क्राइब्ड है, इसलिए जो रेजुलेशन यहाँ लाया गया है उस पर हम लोग का चर्चा शुरू हो जाना चाहिए।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi extended warm greetings to the Central Industrial Security Force on its raising day on Tuesday via social media post. Sharing photographs of CISF personnel, Prime Minister Modi highlighted CISF's pivotal role in safeguarding airports, seaports, nuclear installations, industrial units and other strategic assets. Prime Minister noted that personnel's unwavering commitment significantly contributes to India's internal security and overall progress. The message comes as the paramilitary organization, raised on the 10th of March 1969, continues to play a frontline role in maintaining law and order at vital establishments. Time for a quick and short break, but still to come on the other side. BCCI announces cash rewards for India's T20 squad. Disney Cruise Line's largest ship, the Disney Adventure, is set to begin its maiden voyage. More after the break.
Geopolitics and trade deals. Economic challenges amid development. Hard work and the path to prosperity. It's the economy, always. Between walkers, money is what money does and says. Supply creates its own demand. Between the bulls pulls and bears tears. When supply chains globalization and India rises to the podium. We'll get you centered with the Economic Brief at 8 p.m. every Thursday on DD India.
Welcome back after that short break. We are watching DD India News Hour. Time now to get you all the latest from the world of sports, to begin with cricket first. The Board of Control for Cricket in India announced a cash reward of 131 crore rupees for the entire squad following its third T20 Cricket World Cup victory. The amount covers 15 players, coaching staff and other support staff. The amount is an increment of 6 crore rupees from 125 crore rupees that Rohit Sharma's team was awarded back in 2024 for winning the World Cup. India lifted the prestigious trophy after defeating New Zealand by 96 runs in the finals at Ahmedabad's Narendra Modi Cricket Stadium. India not only defended the title but also became the first team to win the T20 Cricket World Cup trophy thrice. And India will once again take centre stage in global para sport as the second edition of the World Para Athletics Grand Prix begins in New Delhi on Wednesday. Over 250 athletes from 8 nations will compete for top honours at the prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium in New Delhi. The event will feature athletes from India, Russia, Nepal, Bhutan, Hong Kong, Serbia, Bosnia and Egypt, highlighting the growing international presence of para-athletics in the host nation. India will field the largest contingent with over 200 athletes competing across multiple track and field events and sport classifications. The tournament will conclude on 13th of March. A total of 74 international classification slots will be available during the competition. In hockey, the Indian women's team played out a hard-fought 2-2 draw against Scotland in its second match in Hyderabad and continues to lead Pool B of the FIH Hockey World Cup 2026 qualifiers. Scotland capitalised on India's sluggish start, scoring the first goal through penalty corner. But India drew level through a well-worked penalty corner. The hosts took the lead at the stroke of half-time. Scotland failed to clear. However, Scotland pecked back in the third quarter with Fiona Burnett scoring the equaliser. Both India and Scotland have 4 points, though the hosts hold the #1 spot due to a superior goal difference. In badminton, India's Sapik Sairaj, Ranki Reddy and Chirag Shetty will live redemption at the Swiss Open badminton tournament after an early exit from the All England Open last week. The Indian duo will begin their campaign against Singapore's Wesley Koh and Shunsuk Kobe in Basel on Wednesday. The reigning Asian Games champion will hope for a deeper run at the tournament they won in 2023 last. In women's doubles category, Trisa Jolly and Gayatri Gopichand Pulela will face Wu Lingfang and Zheng Wuche of Chinese Taipei in their opening match. Meanwhile, H.S. Pranoy and Kidambi Srikanth will spearhead Indian challenge in men's singles category. Srikanth, who reached 2 finals last year at Malaysia Masters and Syed Modi International, will open against Jason Guanawa. Pranoy will take on Japan's Koki Watanabe. Lakshya Sen and PV Sindhu have decided to skip the tournament. In tennis, world #1 Carlos Alcaraz battled back-to-back defeat Arthur Rendekov by 6-7, 6-3, 6-2 to make it to the 4th round of the Indian Wells Masters tournament. Alcaraz had to dig deep against the big-serving Frenchman, who fended off a set point on the way to winning the first set tiebreaker. But the Spaniard fought back to clinch the second and third set and clinch his 6th victory over Rindekine in 6 meetings. Alcaraz, a 2-time Indian Wells champion, will face Norwegian Casper Ruud for a place in the quarterfinals. Novak Djokovic clawed out a 6-4, 1-6, 6-4 victory over American Alexander Kovacevic to make it to the 4th round of the tournament for the first time since 2017. Djokovic took the first set, but Kovacevic rolled through the second set. But the Serb regrouped in the third and found the break needed to clinch the match. With 5 Indian Wells titles, Djokovic is tied for the record with Swiss great Roger Federer. Unseeded Katerina Siniakova ended Mira Andreeva's title defences, rallying for a 4-6, 7-6 and 6-3 victory. 18 years old, Andreeva was in trouble early against at 44th ranked Siniakova in a rollercoaster contest. Siniakova will face Elina Svitolina for a place in the quarterfinal round. And Disney Cruise Line's largest ship, the Disney Adventure, is all set to begin its maiden voyage from Singapore. Home ported at Marina Bay Cruise Center, the vessel will offer short cruises to nowhere focused on onboard entertainment. The ship features themed zones including a Marvel-inspired attraction area and a 3-deck tall castle at the center for its imagination garden. Take a look. And that's all for this edition of DD India News Hour. But do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan the QR code on the screen to download it right now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks on DD India. I'm Deepika, and from all of us here in New Delhi, thank you so much for watching DD India News Hour. Namaskar.